Now, Nigeria's federal government has warned non-performing centers of excellence under the sponsorship of the Tertiary Education Trust Fund that it will suspend their funding support. Nigeria's Minister of Education, Maman Tahir, made this known in the nation's capital, Abuja, while receiving a report of the assessment and review of the centers under the fund and skills development's special intervention. The minister opposed the submission of the report, which recommended that all non-performing centers of excellence should be given a 6-month grace period to help them refocus on achieving their core mandates. And now joining us on the news to talk more about this is Dr. Oludare Akinlaja, Managing Partner, OAR&D Company. Dr. Akinlaja, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
Well, these centers of excellence are special university departments that focus on specific areas of research and skills development. And we see and know that the Nigerian government, through the TETFund, has been funding such projects. But then, are there challenges with these COEs? Are they facing some issues that we need to be aware of?
Well, thank you very much. When you say issues, I think it's more of with respect to deliverables, all right? So you must understand that let's first ask ourselves, this TETFund we're talking about is literally education tax fund that comes from 2% of companies and organizations. I'm sure we're aware that's how TETFund gets a large amount of its funds. And if companies are investing at that level in education, there has to be some sort of feedback into the system or the society to let us know that these funds are being judiciously used. Now, maybe there's a challenge of direction, of focus, of deliverables, of a unified vision of some sort. You know, it's important for us to be sure as to where these challenges are. But I understand that challenges can be peculiar to whatever institution you find yourself. Is it an issue of access to I don't know, maybe lecturers, access to researchers, access to what they're even researching on, what are they working on, you know? So it can be a plethora of issues, but I think it's important for us to deal in context as to what that particular institution has to deal with, because the time has come for us to really start to assess what are these funds being used for, because companies are giving these funds and they have been consistent with it, at least to the best of my knowledge.
Okay, Dr. Akinlaja, will give this contextual approach right now by listening and watching the report. And when we return, we'll do a bit of analysis further on it. Stay with us.
Yes, sir.
And any other country actually makes progress through scholarly researches and intellectual activities of its scholars. So it was well intended for the TETFund to support this activity in all the universities of Nigeria that so deserve this. So we will look at this carefully and see to it that only centers that justify the name will continue to receive funding. And I've heard the chairman's more or less of an appeal in the recommendation about moratorium for those that are not doing well and that sort of thing. I'm not too sure I personally would be inclined to any moratorium.
You can hear right from the chair of that committee their assessment, and that is what will be implemented. We will ensure that those centers of excellence meet the objectives for which they were established, and to provide the necessary review of the operations, and that is what will guide the intervention.
And of course, Dr. Akinlaja, you just watched most especially the Minister of Education there, Maman Tahir, saying that the focus is on scholarly researches and that it's only schools that are able to live up to their billing in terms of their mandate. And of course, as you mentioned, their deliverables are the ones that will be entitled to these funds. And I know that one particular area that is lacking in all of these is the provision of adequate tools for these research institutions to work with. So having listened to the Minister of Education, now, if you are to tie it together, how would you describe it? What would be your assessment? Something is definitely lacking. So how do we piece it together?
So I think, so from what the minister has said, you see him clearly say, the chairman is suggesting that we pay attention to monetary money. It's like, I am not inclined to that. I think we need to refocus as to what TETFund was originally set up to do. Now, if you look around our campuses, our universities, you will literally see some work done by TETFund with respect to maybe building classrooms and building certain centers and certain stuff. So if you go around our university, you see most of these things being done by TETFund. But from these conversations, seems to me like they are trying to refocus and say, apart from these constructions and this infrastructure we are working on, which is also important, I think it's also important for us to focus on research, focus on conversations that have to do with the development of our society. Of course, you know that these centers of excellence or research institutions are important to the growth of our society. How do we start to research on biotechnology? How can we start to research on agriculture? How do we preserve our food? How do we look at urban and regional planning? Who is coming up with new research concepts as to leadership, sociology, how we exist as a people? These are the conversations that should be coming out, and TETFund needs to put more of its investment in such research. So I like the conversations, which means that universities are going to be put on their toes to begin to push out researchers, to begin to push out research work, to begin to publish resources that will help our societies develop. One of the things I'm always passionate about is how can we begin to develop curriculum, knowledge that is useful for the African society, and not always borrow things that might not necessarily work for us as a people. So this is where our research institutions will be very important to develop a body of knowledge for the continent and for our country, Nigeria.
Of course, even in an ecosystem whereby we see that the price of pharmaceutical products are skyrocketing, there have been talks around having domestically research-based institutions that can come up with those kind of products that can also meet the needs and yearnings of the people, just in line with what you said. But then, Dr. Akinlaja, in its report, the committee that was actually tasked to review the COE's performance declined to recommend any center for upgrade because most centers do not utilize their first C grant for the initial infrastructure required. And I'm also aware that the proposal is to cut the fundings and not provide fundings for these institutions. So do you think that would be appropriate? Because there are talks around providing bailout funds, all right, to enable these intervention takeoffs rather than sustaining the funding. So if these COEs need to improve on their deliverables, what should be the basic thing or the first thing that should be done? Which area should we be looking at? Should we continue to have funds being channeled to them, or it should be some sort of a cameo kind of funding, a bailout being provided for them to offtake whatever intervention? Because of course it boils down to what is being provided or what can be provided by government in terms of finance.
Well, so you can't have that discussion without talking about how we want universities to be self-sufficient and how we want COEs to be self-sufficient. So that's going to be a conversation that's going to be along the value chain. There's a lot of back and forth as to how we can make institutions self-sufficient and all of that. The truth is, based off our design as a nation, as our constitutional makeup, it will be difficult now to say allow universities be on their own because we're not structured as it is to manage that kind of decision. But one of the things this conversation will start to drive is how can institutions begin to commercialize, inventions and innovations. So imagine if a university comes up with a pharma product like you have spoken about. Imagine how much a university can make if we commercialize that product. So these perspectives have to start to build up, that you see government cannot always manage you on the full haul, because there's also that conversation of, does it drive some bit of irresponsibility if we consistently or continuously fund them? If we allow them, give a bailout fund, give a seed fund, allow them internally think through their processes, how do we innovate? How do we invent? How do we commercialize these innovations and inventions? Maybe it will make them wake up and become productive in the society. Okay, so it's just like a child or a father who says to his child, you are now 21 or over, You know, I can't keep feeding you. Okay, I can support a business. Come up with a business plan and give to me. Let me fund your business and see how you can be self-sufficient. Okay, while still guiding that child, while still getting the boundaries of conversations, you are allowing that child make decisions for growth. So I think that's what this conversation is going to drive. How do we make this center of excellence become a bit more self-sufficient? Because the truth is, federal government cannot keep driving these things. It will look as if you are just spoon-feeding a baby, as the case may be. But I need to also point this out, that there's going to be a lot of conversation around politicking, because you can't take that away from this narrative. So what centers of excellence are you going to take away? If you take away the one up north, they'll say you're supporting the ones down south. If you take it the way down, you know, so you see why I say our structure literally affects most of these conversations. So we really have to detox ourselves from all this pressure of politicking, pressure of government and top-down heavy, and allow people actually unbundle and create some level of growth for these centers of excellence.
Very robust contribution coming from you, Dr. Oludare Akinlaja. We really appreciate your time for, of course, having you talk to us at this time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.